Shabbat Shalom. It's good to be here. So many of you I know over the years. Some went to Israel with me. Some met on the cruise. Some I've met visiting here. I wanted to do a couple of things. One, let you know that Rebbitzin Judy has a sign-up sheet in the back for those that are interested in ordering any of my books that are available. I have one that's called Oi, How Did I Get Here? 31 Things I Wish Someone Had Told Me Before I Entered the Ministry. I have a book called Transient Singularity, which is a time travel, science fiction, international espionage evangelism book. And so, and then I have the With Me in Paradise, which takes the conversation between Yeshua and the criminal on the cross and shows a pattern for walking in the blessings of God that begins in the garden and goes all the way through the Scriptures. So, and then I just put, I do Facebook, and if you're not a friend of mine on Facebook, I hope you'll friend me, or whatever you have to do that. But I started posting man wisdoms, just every day, just a little thought. And so many wives sent me emails saying, you need to make a book out of these so I could give it to my husband, that I decided to make a book out of them. And it's now available, and all of my books are on Amazon. But these are just little short quotes like, it doesn't matter how many times you remind your wife about something she forgot, it will not enable her to do it yesterday. If you only do nice things for your wife when she does nice things for you, you don't have a marriage, you have a business relationship. If you treat your wife like trash, one day someone will come by and pick her up. Be the husband you would want your daughter to marry. And the last one I'm going to read this morning. There are much better ways to get your wife to look up to you than making her feel small. So, anyhow, make a great Father's Day gift. It also makes a great present for those that are, this time season, people are getting married, and good book to give as a wedding gift. And again, those are all, you can sign up to get them. I'm not actually selling them this morning. There are a few in the back that are for you to look at. But if you'll sign up and give your information and all, we can send them through you from Amazon, and that'll get there, get to you, and they'll get here in plenty of time. And there's no shipping charge for it, so it's just the price of the book. Anyhow, I wanted to read a couple of things. Somebody sent this to me by email. I felt it was pertinent this morning. I just read that 4,153,237 people got married last year. Not to cause any trouble, but shouldn't that number be even? Today a man knocked on my door and asked for a small donation toward the local swimming pool. I gave him a glass of water. I want to die peacefully in my sleep like my grandfather, not screaming and yelling like the passengers in his car. If I had $1 for every girl that found me unattractive, they would eventually find me attractive. I find it ironic that the colors red, white, and blue stand for freedom until they're flashing behind you. A recent study has found that women who carry a little extra weight live longer than the men who mention it. Relationships are like algebra. Have you ever looked at your ex and wondered why? You know that little tingly feeling you get when you like somebody? That's your common sense leaving your body. Did you know that dolphins are so smart that within a few weeks of captivity they can train people to stand on the very edge of the pool and throw them fish? My therapist says I have a preoccupation with vengeance. We'll see about that. I think my neighbor is stalking me. She's been Googling my name on her computer. I saw it last night through my telescope. I'm not fat, I'm just easier to see. If you think nobody cares whether you're alive or not, just try missing a couple payments. I'm not going to read that one. My therapist says my narcissism causes me to misread social situations. I'm pretty sure she was hitting on me. My 60-year-old kindergarten reunion is coming up, and I'm worried about the 175 pounds I've gained since then. My pharmacist asked me my birthday again today. I'm pretty sure she's going to get me something. The location of your mailbox shows how far away from your house you think you can be in your bathrobe before you look like a mental patient. I think it's cool that Chinese people made a whole language entirely out of tattoos. Money can't buy happiness, but it keeps the kids in touch. And the last one is the reason Mayberry was so peaceful and quiet is because nobody was married. Andy, Aunt B, Arnie, Floyd, Howard, Goober, Gomer, Sam, Ernest T. Bass, Helen, Thelma Lou, Clara, and of course Opie were all single. The only married person was Otis, and he stayed drunk. So, okay, now that you're ready, by the way, by way of trivia, because I'm a font of trivial information, Otis from Andy Griffith was also Mr. Whitaker from Adventures in Odyssey. See what the Lord can do? Okay, good morning. Now that you've endured that, the Torah portion for this week, we begin to read the book of Bamidbar, or Numbers. And the first part of it was read earlier. I want to point out a couple of things this morning. One is that the word Bamidbar, which is translated in the wilderness, comes from the root word, which means word, dever. And there's actually a hidden message in this, and that is you can either be in the word or you can be in the wilderness. And it's really important because the book of Numbers should have never been written. Think about it. The book of Numbers exists solely because the children of Israel refused to go into the promised land the first time. We have 38.75, 38 and 3/4 years for those older, years that go on that are in the book of Numbers that exist in written form in our Bible solely because of the rebellion and lack of faith of the children of Israel. We should have gone from Leviticus to a short explanation about how they crossed the sea. the Jordan into the land. But instead we have the book of Numbers. The book of Numbers begins with the counting of the people that are able to go to war. Those from 20 years and up, male, were able to go to war. We saw there was a little over 600,000 of them. It also begins with the understanding that the Levites would never be counted among those that would carry arms, bear arms for Israel. There's a reason for that. One is that if we understand the concept that we will always have to fight, but that the battles that we win will be won because of prayer and worship, and you never count the people praying and worshiping. You count the one who's answering the prayers and receiving the worship. And so the Levites were never to be counted. It said you will never count the Levites when you do the census of the people. Now, also interestingly enough, that the Levites, when they were numbered or among the people, they were numbered at 1 month old, where everybody else was numbered at 20 years old. Which lets you know if you want to fight the battles, you can, but you're going to spend 20 years to get to the point where your time counts. Where if you are a worshiper and a praiser, it's almost immediately that everything you do counts for the Lord. But I want to say, none of that I just said is my message for this morning. I want to talk about something completely different that is relevant to Numbers, and that is that we are entering into a time. Last week we read a dual parsha, and the parashot dealt with the feast days. It dealt with largely with the Day of Atonement. It dealt with the time of Yovel, or the time of Jubilee. I love hearing shofar sound. There's something special about that sound, and it's I just love it. I have since I was a little boy. The first time I heard the rabbi blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, and I said, I want to learn to do that. I did learn to blow a shofar, but I still can't do it as well as that rabbi did that day. But love the sound of the shofar. But something that's missed in between last week's parsha and this week's parsha is a really relevant thing for us, and that is that as we celebrate Yom Kippur, we celebrate a two-part holy day. Most of the time when we celebrate Yom Kippur, we only really celebrate the atonement. But Yom Kippur was also the day that the year of Jubilee began. In Judaism, we have 5 New Years. You know, I run into people all the time, especially those that get their education on the internet, who become experts overnight in Hebrew and Greek. It's just amazing how that happens. Google is the enemy of so many righteous things, simply because people don't understand. It's like people who say dumb. I was going to say stupid. You can't say stupid anymore, not on recordings, because people hear you saying they're stupid and they get offended by that. I don't understand why they would get offended by it, so I refuse to use the word stupid anymore. I just say dumb. And when people say dumb things like, we don't need to follow the Talmud. I was talking with Rabbi Renee about this yesterday. That's a dumb thing to say, because first of all, everybody follows something from the Talmud. If you love your family, you're following things taught in the Talmud. What are we going to do? Take away all those things? Now, do we give the Talmud authority over every aspect of our life? Are we looking to it as the final authority rather than God? Absolutely no. But if you do a Passover Seder, you're following Talmud. Somebody said yesterday on a post that there was no dancing in the front of the synagogue in the first century. To which I replied, I can't prove this because we lost the videotapes. But we know that Miriam and the ladies danced in front of the nation Israel when they crossed the sea. We know that David danced in front of all Israel, so much so his wife got upset. And we know that they danced at the temple. So I'm pretty sure they danced in worship at synagogues, or at least some synagogues in the first century. So, but I can't prove it, but I can prove from text that dancing was involved in worship. And it wasn't segregated or segmented, and that people worshiped together in dance. And they said, well, it wasn't in the front of the synagogue. And I said, you got no clue. First of all, there were no front of synagogues in first century. If you go to Israel, you'll see they had a centralized place that if there was a bema was there, and everybody sat all the way around it. There was no front. And depending on which synagogue you go to, the focal point or where they were facing is different, depending on where Jerusalem is. And if you go to a place like Capernaum, you'll find that they had two segments in the synagogue there. And it appears that they would roll the ark into an open space between the two of them to close off the one room from the other room during service. Said, you just don't know. And I said, look, here's the bottom line. You can't prove that they didn't dance in synagogues in the first century. So just shut up. I have so much grace. Look, everything we do is based upon traditions that were handed down to us for thousands of years. There are good traditions and bad traditions. We have to decide which ones are which, how we're going to do things. But when somebody says we don't follow the Talmud, it lets me know they don't have a clue what they're talking about, because the Talmud isn't a series of directions, it's a series of arguments. It's thoughts. And if you read a section, you'll find there may be 20 different rabbis all arguing from a different position. And the really cool thing about the Talmud is it doesn't necessarily come up with a conclusion. We get into all of these different things, and they go on and on and on, but the reality is we get into it today with people that are arguing about which calendar you're going to follow. You know, I have people I celebrate Rosh Hashanah, Yom Teruah, and Tishri 1. And I'll see people say, you can't call that New Year's. Why not? Well, because it says Nisan 1 will now be your New Year. Great. It also tells us to pay tithes on trees somewhere between January and February, and that's a new year. There's also a new year for paying tithes on animals. Comes in June or July on the calendar. There's also a new year for Jubilee, which comes on Yom Kippur. Last year, the year before, when we went through the whole Shemitah year and Jubilee year, and everybody was excited about everything, and people made a lot of money writing books. Most of those books were based on Rosh Hashanah being the start of the year of Jubilee, when the Bible says Yom Kippur is. I said all that to say this. Yom Kippur is one of the most important days on the Jewish calendar. It is not just Yom Hadin, the day of judgment, but it's also the day of release. One of the problems with only focusing on the Day of Atonement, the Day of Judgment, is that we forget that with that, on that day, came deliverance from debt, deliverance from slavery, restoration of inheritance, and all that happens on Yom Kippur. It's a two-part fulfilled holiday with a beginning and then a time period before the celebration of the fullness. Matter of fact, most of us are familiar with Jeremiah 31:31, yes? Okay, and some of us are familiar with Jeremiah 31:30, because if you're reading a Jewish Bible, Hebrew Bible, it's verse 30. If you're reading a Gentile Bible, it's verse 31. But we're familiar with the concept that Hashem is going to make a new covenant with the house of Israel, the house of Judah, and it's not going to be like the covenant that our fathers broke, even though he was a husband to them, and so on. Goes through the whole thing. And we love that part. But the next verse says, and at that time, no man will teach his neighbor, because all will know me from the least to the greatest. And the Orthodox, those that are anti-missionaries, will come against us and they'll say Yeshua could not have started the Brit Chadashah, the new covenant, because we're still teaching. And everybody on earth doesn't know me from the least to the greatest. And many people get concerned about that because they don't have an answer for that. But the answer is, just like Yom Kippur is a two-part holy day, and with a beginning and then a fulfillment that comes later, Jeremiah 31:31 starts with the promise of the new covenant, and then comes along and keeps going until we get to the time when Yeshua will rule on earth, and then no man will have to be taught, because they'll know me from the least to the greatest. When the inheritance of Israel becomes fully restored to God's people. This last week we celebrated the reunification of Jerusalem. And I went and watched that movie. By the way, I encourage you to go watch the In Our Hands. But there's one moment in the movie I hope you'll pay attention to. It's where one of the Israeli soldiers, upon hearing that they were not going to stay on the Temple Mount, but they were going to come down and only go up to, after going on the Temple Mount, actually hanging a Israeli flag on top of the Dome of the Rock. Did you know they did that? It stayed there for about 10 minutes until the politicians said, you need to get that down. The whole world will come against us if we fly that there. And they moved it from the top of the Dome of the Rock to the Western Wall. And this man said, I didn't come to fight for the wall. I came to fight for the Temple Mount. We settle so much for so little when God's Word promises us so much. One of the things we have to understand, I am so thankful for God's atonement. I'm so thankful for His forgiveness. I'm so thankful for all that He's done, but that's not the end of the story. We have to remember Israel left Egypt and they were redeemed. Right? You can nod your head, it's true. There, it makes me feel better. There we go. They were redeemed from Egypt. They went through the water, which was a symbol of immersion. Right? There we go. Then they went and got the Torah. And then they spent time in the wilderness before they ultimately got the fullness of the promise that God gave them. We're in that same situation, but we're living as if we just left Egypt and got the Torah. We're supposed to immediately go into the promised land, but instead of going into the promised land, we're arguing amongst ourselves about how we get there and what we can do and what we can't do and who's doing what and who's doing why and what group I'm going to be a part of. I'm so excited this week and next week in Colombia. Rabbi Shapira is doing an event. In Europe, the International Messianic Jewish Alliance is doing an event in Europe. There's events going on in Africa. There's events, and you know, every one of them is going to be different. But all for the same purpose. Wouldn't it be nice if we could actually agree that we're all trying to serve God? Instead of telling God that we can't do it that way or because we just don't have faith in that. I get so frustrated dealing with people who proclaim faith in God but demonstrate lack of faith. I love congregations like yours and like ours, made up of a lot of different people from a lot of different places. I was excited the other week when we prayed for President Trump's trip to Israel. Now, I'm not going to talk politics. I don't care about politics. I care about God and what God's doing. President Trump was going to Israel. I got to pray. Before he went to Israel, he went to Saudi Arabia. And when we prayed at my synagogue, there's a young man named Michael who's from Saudi Arabia. He was a Muslim who came to faith in Yeshua. He wears a pin that has the flag of the United States and the flag of Israel on it. And he wears proclaims faith in Yeshua, and we got up together and prayed for our president as he was going to Saudi Arabia, that the Lord would open doors there for relationship with Israel from Saudi Arabia. We prayed for Israel, but we have Michael, who's from Saudi Arabia. We have people from Guatemala. We have people from Colombia. We have people from Panama. We have people from Ethiopia. We have people from Saudi Arabia. We have people from all over the place. And I'm not concerned with who does what. You know, Jewish people do this and Gentile people do that and this and that and all the argument. I don't really care. I really don't. I think that God is strong enough to keep the independent differences that He wants between the Jewish people and the non-Jewish people, where that's not my job. My job is to teach Torah and let God's Spirit work in the hearts of His people. If they actually read the Bible, I have more people want my favorite thing to happen, and it happens more and more and more, and I'm sure it happens here also. We have people that come visit our congregation, and I always go up to the new people before service because the new people are always there on time. And they're there where I can talk to them before the other people get there. You know, the regular people, so they don't, all the problems of my congregants aren't there yet, so I just talk to the new people. So I always say, well, you know, where are you from? Well, we just moved to town, or, you know, I've been living here. Well, how did you find us? I found you on the internet. Well, what brought you here? And this is almost the constant answer now, and I love it. They say, I started reading the Bible. It's amazing if you actually read what's in the Bible, that it will tell you how to live your life and what to do and what not to do. If you just open the book, it's so much easier to do it that way. But it's amazing how many times people come up, well, I started reading my Bible, and I ended up here. That's what's going to happen. It's not up to us to tell people what they have to do. It's up to us to introduce them to the one that will tell them what they have to do. Because as surprising as that may seem to most of you, like it was to me when I learned, I'm not in authority over the world. I'm not in charge of every human being in Pensacola. They're not all my children. I can't even get my children to do what I want. Why would I think I was going to get people that don't know me to do what I want? You don't understand. You're right, I don't. I don't have to. I am so grateful. There's a couple of things I love. One is, basis of all my theology is God is smart. I start there. Why do we have to do this? I don't know. It doesn't matter. If I know, if I understand, we can try to figure it out all you want. Doesn't make any difference. God's smart. I just do what He says. It's just as simple as that. The other thing is, I don't have to understand people. It's not my job. We have people that go to school to try to understand people. At the end of 4 years and 3 years and 2 years, they still don't understand people. You're not going to understand people. I don't understand my wife. I've been married 35 years. I don't understand my wife. I don't plan to understand my wife. I don't spend time trying to figure it out. One of my man wisdom things is never deceive yourself into thinking you know what your wife is thinking. It's not my job. I don't have to understand my wife, and she doesn't have to understand me. I have to love my wife. She has to love me. Of course, women are told they had to be taught how to love us. Nowhere in the Bible does it say men have to learn how to love their wives. The Bible says for the older women to teach the younger women how to love their husbands. That's how bad we are, gentlemen. It's not natural. They have to learn special classes. I don't have to understand God. What I have to do is be willing to read His Word and let His Spirit talk to my heart. And when He does, I'll do the things He wants me to do because He told me. And He is the authority over my life. It's so easy. But we argue over all this stuff in the wilderness, and I'm so tired of being in the wilderness. Listen, I love telling people that Yeshua came and He died so His blood could provide atonement for us. That's an amazing, amazing thing. It's beyond anything we can really understand, but He did it, and we're free from our sin, and everything we did from that moment back is delivered, gone free. You're set free. I am not an alcoholic who is recovering. I am a delivered man. What I used to be, old things are gone away, all things became new. I am not that way anymore, and that's wonderful that He did that. But you can only preach repentance for so long before you have to start teaching how to live as a repented person, how to live as a child of the King, how to live as one whose inheritance is restored, as one who has been redeemed fully, as one that is part of the royal family, as one that doesn't owe the debt anymore. I don't know how many times I talk to people in my congregation. I say, look, I'd really like for you to get involved in this ministry. And they say, well, I'd really like to get involved in ministry, but you don't know who I am. You don't know what I did. I said, yes, I do. So what do you mean? Well, when you became a believer, I know exactly who you are from then to now. I don't need to know before that. I've had people come to me and said, Rabbi, I just want you to know that before my wife and I came to faith, she was pregnant and our first child was born out of wedlock. And I said, and so I just thought you needed to know. Why? Well, because it's part of our life. And I said, not really. I said, I expect sinners to sin. That's not a surprise to me when people come up and say, I used to sin. Right. Me too. But you don't understand I was evil. Yeah, me too. But I used to drink. Yeah, me too. But I used to, right, yeah. We can go through a whole long list before I run out of me toos. But that's not who I am, and it's not who you are. And we as Messianics love the feasts and festivals. But we rarely teach that the end of Yom Kippur is not the Ne'ilah service, closing the gate, which is what's taught traditionally now. The gate wasn't closed for us. The veil was rent so that we could boldly enter into the very presence of God. We're not waiting for that to happen again. We're not hoping that God will do what He did. It frustrates me. And oh, good, I got another hour and a half. Cool. It frustrates me when I hear songs sung that are asking God to do stuff He's already done. Like, Lord, send your Spirit. That email's 2,000 years late, folks. We're about to celebrate the commemoration of that event this Wednesday night through Thursday. It's already happened. It's kind of like my wife asking permission to go to the store after I told her to go to the store. Or your children asking for ice cream as they're eating it. He's done that. Atonement is done. We rejoice that it's done, but we're looking for the return of the Messiah and the fullness of His deliverance, but that's not just what we're looking for, because we have life and it more abundant now. We have the fullness of His promise now because we live in this world but not of this world, which means we're a part of a time where there is no time. When He said it is finished, it was. And we enter into a place where there is no time for us to wait for God to do something. He's already done it. But we're hanging on to our atonement. We love being miserable. You give 10 people 15 minutes and they'll complain. It's a gift Judaism gave to the world. Gift of grumbling. We're experts at it. We need to change our mindset. We need to get out of the wilderness. We need to understand that every time you do that, your book of Numbers becomes written. Another page, another paragraph comes into that book that should not be there. There shouldn't have been a book of Numbers in the Bible if the children of Israel had faith. And there shouldn't be a book of Numbers in your life. We sometimes rejoice in God delivering us from things we shouldn't have been in. Wouldn't it be nice not to have to do that? People say, my wife and I, the Lord really worked in our lives. We were horrible to each other for years, and He restored us. And we think that's a great testimony. It is a testimony. But a great testimony is, we loved each other, and we never went through all that time of being mean to each other. I used to go to a church with my wife when I first came to faith. And the church is a very large congregation. And they started ministering to some kids at a place called the Boys Base, which was part of the Navy base. And it was a joint thing where kids who got in trouble would go to the base and they'd be housed there. And they'd be, went through like a boot camp type setup to try to get their lives in order. And they'd allow them to come to churches or synagogues or whatever for worship. And so the church would pick these kids up and bring them to the church, and then the kids would come to faith, and then they would get very excited about these very mean kids who did all this stuff coming to faith. They would have them get up and share their testimony. The kids that were raised in the congregation started doing the things that the other kids were doing because nobody called them up and said, "This is my son who's never done drugs, never ran around, never got arrested, never robbed a bank or a store, a drug store, or a liquor store. This one has his testimony of God keeping him and loving God all his life." And these kids who had these wonderful testimonies of God's preservation in their life started to go out and do things so that they had a testimony that their parents would be proud of. Listen, you responded to that pretty strongly. But think about how much of our testimony is testimony about how God did stuff to fix things that we messed up after we were believers. Our testimony should be, God said we could take the land. And we did. God said He was going to give this to me, and He did. God said two would become one flesh, and we did. God said if you train up a child the way you go, when He told you not to depart, and He did. We so sometimes rejoice in the fact that God forgives us that we forget that He prefers obedience to sacrifice. Which means He'd rather we didn't have to repent. He will forgive us, thankfully, but He will not always strive with man. When we look at the book of Numbers, it should be a remembrance, a reminder to us that our epistle that's seen and read of all men should be a really small book, filled with testimony of what God did through us, not what God had to do to us before He could do anything through us. The book of Deuteronomy is the retelling of the book of Leviticus because the book of Numbers exists. Think about that. Exodus chapter 20 in closing, and this will be my first closing. Exodus chapter 20 God speaks from the mountain and tells the children of Israel what's known as the Ten Commandments. The children of Israel then, after being delivered from Egypt, after seeing the miracles, signs, and wonders, after seeing the waters part, after seeing all that stuff happen, made a golden calf. Exodus 34 gives what the Bible actually does call the Ten Commandments. Exodus 20, it never calls them that. By the way, look that up. You'll find that the real Ten Commandments are in Exodus 34, not Exodus 20. But God gives the Ten Commandments there, and those Ten Commandments all have to do with things like the redemption of the firstborn, the feasts and festivals, honoring the Shabbat, all the things that have the connection to the Messiah. Because 34 happens right after 32, which is when the golden calf is made. God gave these commandments with further explanation. In Exodus 34, the commandment that says don't make any idols now includes the words, don't make any molten idols. A little more specific. It's a pretty amazing thing because when God says that, He doesn't say again. He didn't say don't make any molten idols again. He says don't make any molten idols as if it had never happened before. Because that's how God does when He forgives us. But we shouldn't have to read chapter 34. Chapter 34 exists because of chapter 32. If they'd have just done what He said in 20, we wouldn't have that whole chapter. Jeremiah 31 exists. The promise of the new covenant exists. Not just to demonstrate God's forgiveness and His grace, but to remind us of our failure. Not so we would rejoice in the failure, and not even so we could say, because of grace, I'm going to sin more. But so that we would wake up to the fact that we can live above sin. We don't have to sin. I hear people say that all the time. Well, you can't not sin. Yes, you can. Let me give you, I can prove it. You ready? If you committed murder today, raise your hand. Give you a minute. Not if you wanted to commit murder. Any parent that had to get their kids ready for Shabbat, I know that's a real thing. But you didn't commit murder. You mean it's possible not to commit a sin? Wow. Anybody rob a bank on the way here? Not an ATM machine. That's different. It's absolutely possible not to commit sin. It is a cop-out to say we have to sin. What we have to do is live for the Lord. The more we listen to His voice, the more we hear Him, the more we will. And look, our book of Numbers can be all about what God did through us, rather than how God rescued us over and over and over. And think what testimony that is to His power, to His grace, and to His mercy.